I woke up from a 5-month coma to an empty hospital room, but it wasn't the silence that terrified me, it was the 5-word note taped to my water pitcher. Written in my brother's aggressive handwriting, it read, "We stopped paying. Survive." I read those words 20 times before my hands finally stopped shaking. 1 hour later, my lawyer walked into my room with a tall stranger in a sharp black suit. The stranger looked at the empty chairs, looked at the note in my hand, and said a single sentence that would burn down everything my family thought they knew about me. "Your father left too soon," he said. "He never learned your biggest secret. Because here's the thing about being the quiet one who pays for everything. People assume they know exactly what you're worth." My father was about to find out he'd been dead wrong for 6 years. What happened at that county courthouse in September is something the people of Willow Bend still talk about. But before I tell you what the man in the black suit said next, you need to know about the secret I buried 6 years before I ever closed my eyes. Welcome to Secret Sibling Saga, where the quietest person in the family is never as powerless as they think. Let me take you back to that hospital room. I'd been a nurse on that exact floor for 12 years. I knew what a loved patient's room looked like. You see the balloons going soft in the corner, get well cards taped in neat rows on the wall, colorful drawings from grandkids. The woman in the room across the hall had a rotation of visitors, so steady you could set your watch by it. My room had a plastic water pitcher, a scrap of paper, and a heavy, suffocating silence that had clearly been sitting there for a very long time. Carol Thompson, who had worked night shifts with me for 8 years, was my day nurse when I finally fully surfaced. Coming out of a coma isn't like what you see in the movies. You don't just snap your eyes open and start talking. You drift. You surface slowly over weeks, like a deep-sea diver who can't rush the climb without getting the bends. But that morning was the first morning my head felt clear enough to actually understand what I was looking at. Carol couldn't even meet my eyes. She busied herself with my 4-line, adjusting things that didn't need adjusting. "Where's my family, Carol?" I asked. My voice sounded like dry gravel. She squeezed my hand and looked away. "Lena, honey, just drink your water." That's when my eyes drifted to the pitcher. The note was written in blue ballpoint pen, all capital letters, pressed so hard into the paper that the pen had actually torn a tiny hole on the letter Y. I knew that handwriting instantly. I'd seen it on birthday cards, and I'd seen it on loan paperwork I'd been guilted into co-signing. My brother, Liam, had written that note. But someone had to hold the tape. Someone had to stand in the doorway and let him do it. And someone had raised the both of them. 12 years on that floor, and I'd watched other people's families fall apart in rooms just like this one. I was the one who held their hands, the one who paged the chaplain, the one who brought the bad family room coffee. I just never, in my wildest dreams, thought I'd see my own name on the whiteboard with absolutely nobody listed under the emergency contact line. But a note like that doesn't get written in one bad month. It gets written over 15 long years, and it started the spring my mother died. I was 19, halfway through my first year of nursing school, when she went. It was ovarian cancer, fast and mean, taking her in just 11 weeks. My mother was the switchboard of our family. Every single wire ran through her. When she died, the lines went dead, and somebody had to pick them up. My father looked around the empty kitchen, and his eyes landed right on me. Liam was 23 and completely allergic to responsibility. Chloe was only 14, still a kid. So, the job became mine. I finished nursing school, took a demanding job at the county hospital, and started paying. Quietly. The way my mom would have. I paid for a new roof on the farmhouse when I was 25. I paid for my dad's supplemental health insurance when the farm had a devastatingly bad year. I paid Liam's bail once, and I paid off his truck loan twice. I bought Chloe's textbooks every single semester. I actually ran the math once, adding up the numbers in a spiral notebook, but I stopped because the final figure made me feel a cold, heavy knot in my stomach that I didn't have a name for yet. And my father, George Miller, a 63-year-old man who lived and breathed third-generation corn and soybeans, would put his heavy hand on my shoulder every Thanksgiving and say the exact same thing. "You were always the strong one, Lena." I used to carry that sentence around like a shiny medal. I'd repeat it to myself during grueling double shifts, in the freezing parking garage at 2 in the morning, and while I was on hold with the bank trying to sort out yet another family emergency. The strong one. It took me 15 years, a coma, and a piece of tape to finally hear that sentence for what it actually was. It wasn't a medal. It was a price tag. And the price went up every single year. Picture a Sunday dinner about a year before my accident, because it tells you absolutely everything about how our family functioned. We were in the farmhouse kitchen, my mother's kitchen, with the same yellow curtains she had sewn still hanging in the window. My dad was sitting at the head of the table, carving the roast, presiding over us. Liam, 37 years old by then, was holding court, bragging about his farm equipment dealership over in Kingston, about 2 hours away, and how it was just about to turn the corner. Liam's businesses were always just about to turn the corner. Chloe, 28, sweet and sunny, was telling stories about her kindergarten class. She was the only person at that table who ever actually asked how my week was. And me? I was at the sink before dessert, washing pans that nobody had asked me to wash, with my checkbook sitting in my purse like a loaded service weapon. The routine never changed. Somewhere between the pie and the coffee, Dad would clear his throat, casually look out the window, and mention that Liam had a rough quarter coming up. That the dealership needed a quick bridge loan. That family holds family up. And I'd get out the checkbook while everyone else suddenly found the pattern on the tablecloth absolutely fascinating. But on that particular Sunday, the number my dad floated was much bigger than usual. Something in me, some small, tired muscle, flinched. "Let me think about it," I said. You would have thought I had fired a gun right there in the kitchen. Forks stopped midair. Liam let out a short, ugly laugh with no real humor in it. Dad set down the carving knife and looked at me the way he looked at a wooden fence post that had shifted out of alignment. "Think about what?" he asked, his voice even and terrifyingly slow. "Family is not something you think about, Lena. I wrote the check that night. I always did. But I want you to remember that flinch, because it turns out my gut knew something I didn't. Now, for the part my family never knew. The secret the man in the black suit was referring to. 6 years before my accident, when I was 28, my dad nearly lost the entire farm. I found out completely by accident. I found a certified letter left on the passenger seat of his truck while he was out in the barn. The bank was calling the note. $148,000, due in 90 days. There was cold, sterile foreclosure language printed right there on page 2. My dad had been quietly refinancing that land for a decade to cover his bad years and Liam's endless business disasters, and he had hidden every single bit of it. He would have let the county take my mother's kitchen before he ever let the neighbors see him fail. So, I did what the strong one does. I went to see Ben Carter, a town lawyer with a gray suit older than me, and together, we built a quiet little machine. We registered a private company called Falcon Corp Incorporated, named after the small hawks that hunt along our fence lines. Falcon Corp paid off the bank note in full. $90,000 of that money was my share of my mom's life insurance, money I had never touched. $58,000 was every single dollar I had saved in 12 years of nursing. In exchange, my dad signed the deed over to Falcon Corp and leased the farm back for $1 a year. He knew he had lost the farm to an agricultural investment company. He just never knew who actually caught it. That was my one absolute condition, and I made Ben Carter swear to it on his license. Dad could never know Falcon Corp was me. Because if he knew, the shame would kill him, or he would hate me forever. And, honestly, I couldn't tell you which of those outcomes scared me more. So, my father signed away the land without telling his children, and I bought it without telling my father. 2 massive secrets went to sleep in the very same drawer of Ben's filing cabinet, and they stayed there, undisturbed, for 6 years. Until the accident. It happened on a Tuesday night in December. I had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift, 3 difficult admissions, 1 code blue we ultimately lost, and I was driving home on Route 17 a little after midnight. Black ice doesn't announce itself, and it certainly doesn't care who you are. The road simply stops being a road. They told me later the car rolled twice and came to rest in the middle of O'Malley's cornfield. The deputy who found me actually thought I was already gone. Traumatic brain injury, a shattered wrist, 3 broken ribs, and a bruised lung. The surgeons did their work, but then my brain pulled the blinds and hung a sign that said closed until further notice. Here is the joke I never got to laugh at. I was the nurse who nagged every single person about their end-of-life paperwork. I had stood at 100 different bedsides, looking people in the eye and saying, "Get your power of attorney done, honey. Pick your person while you are still healthy." And yet, my own file? Completely empty. I was single, no kids, 34, and healthy. My person was going to be future Lena, who would get to it after the holidays. But you cannot sign a power of attorney when you are unconscious. Nobody can. So, the hospital did what hospitals do, and the court did what courts do when there is no paperwork. It looked for next of kin. Within 3 weeks, a probate judge named Sophia Hayes signed an order making my father my emergency guardian and the conservator of everything I owned. My checking account, my savings, $52,000 of it, rebuilt one shift at a time in the 6 years since I'd established Falcon Corp, my apartment, my car, my mail. Every key to my life was handed by a well-meaning court to a man who had believed his entire life that a daughter's money was just family money she happened to be holding for him. I had to piece the next 5 months together afterward from records and from what Carol Thompson saw. And I will give it to you the way I got it, cold. In January, they visited. All three of them, most weekends. Dad sat with his hat in his hands. Chloe read to me. Carol told me that even Liam came by. In February, the doctors started using longer, heavier words, and one of them said the sentence that changed the entire weather of my life. She may never regain meaningful function. After that, the visits thinned out. In March, the first big withdrawals started showing up in the conservator ledger. Care coordination, property management, family travel expenses related to patient comfort. In April, my apartment lease was surrendered. My furniture went into Liam's garage. My phone was shut off. I want to be fair, because fair matters to me, even when it stings. The medical bills were real. My insurance through the hospital covered the worst of it, and the caseworkers had already started the health guard paperwork for long-term care. Nobody was mortgaging anything to keep my heart beating. The money my father was moving wasn't going to my machines. It was going out the other door. Then, the first week of May, they came one last time. Carol was on the shift. They took the cards down, she told me, and the photo of Mom from the windowsill. Dad stood at the foot of my bed for a long minute, entirely alone. And whatever he said to me, nobody heard it. Then Liam taped the note to the water pitcher, and my family walked out to the parking lot and drove back to Cincinnati. All of them. Gone. We stopped paying. Survive. 8 days later, a Tuesday morning, my eyes finally started tracking Carol across the room. 8 days. They couldn't hold the rope for 8 more days. And thank God they didn't, because I woke up owing them absolutely nothing. So, that is the room we are standing in. Me, propped up on pillows, barely able to adjust my own weight. A note in my lap. 3 weeks of clear-headed mornings behind me. A body that had to relearn how to climb a flight of stairs. And in walks Ben Carter, gray suit, older now, carrying the same leather folder he had carried for 6 years. Behind him was a man I had never met. Tall, quiet, wearing a black suit, the kind of stillness that expensive rooms teach you. Ben sat down and took my hand, which is something Ben does not do. Lena, he said, this is Arthur Stone. He is the trust officer at my firm. He administers Falcon Corp. I looked at the stranger who had been keeping my biggest secret in a filing cabinet for half a decade. And Arthur Stone looked back at me and said the strangest, kindest thing anyone had said to me in 5 months. Your father left too soon, he said. He never learned your biggest secret. Then he set a single sheet of paper on my blanket. It wasn't a bill, and it wasn't a ledger. It was a printout from a real estate listing site. My mother's farmhouse. My grandmother's peonies were blooming along the porch in the photo, under a banner that said coming soon and an asking price of $310,000. My family wasn't just gone. They were selling the farm to bail out Liam's dealership. And they were doing it fast. But there was one small problem that none of them, not my father, not my brother, not a single soul in that family, knew existed. The people selling that farm did not own it. I did. Ben watched my face, and for the first time in 6 years, he smiled like a lawyer. Whenever you are ready, he said, we should talk about what you would like to do. Before I decided anything, I wanted to see the damage. All of it. In one place. Nurses are like that. You don't treat the fever, you find the infection. Ben brought me the conservator ledger my father had been required to keep for the court, and I read it the way I read lab results, flat, slow, and twice. When I went under, my savings account held $52,000. The morning I read that ledger, it held $3,100. Nearly $49,000 had walked out of my life while I slept, and the ledger dressed every dollar of it in a little paper costume. Care coordination, $800 a month paid to my father. Property management for an apartment that had been emptied and surrendered. Mileage and meals related to patient welfare. Storage fees paid to Liam for keeping my own furniture in his own garage. And then there was my favorite, a single line in March, miscellaneous family support related to patient recovery. $9,800. Round as a plate. I sat that page down and looked out the window for a long while. There is a specific, hollow feeling when a number confirms what your gut already filed away years ago. It doesn't knock you down. It settles in your chest like a diagnosis you had been waiting on. My father hadn't panicked and grabbed money in a crisis. These entries were monthly, tidy, patient. He had done it the way he plowed a field, in straight, efficient lines, like a man doing ordinary work in an ordinary season. Carol found me still holding the ledger that afternoon and asked if I was okay. I will be, I said. And I meant it. But first, I needed to know exactly what had cost $9,800 in March, because I had a guess, and I absolutely hated it. Meanwhile, I had to do the humblest work of my life, which was becoming a patient. 5 months flat on your back takes everything from you. My legs had forgotten their job. My right hand, the one the surgeons rebuilt, couldn't hold a fork steady for the first week. In rehab, they cheer for you when you stand up like you're a toddler. And the day I walked the length of the parallel bars, a 26-year-old therapist named Sarah teared up, and I let her hug me. For 12 years, I had been the one holding the gait belt. Being on the other end of it teaches you things about yourself you could not learn any other way. And one of the things it taught me was ugly. I did not know how to be helped. Every tray Carol carried in, some muscle in me instinctively reached to carry it back. The nurses would laugh and swap my hand off the bed rail. You would think the hardest part of that spring was the note, but honestly, the hardest part was letting people be kind to me without immediately checking what I owed them in return. Somewhere in there, I tried to reach my family. I called my dad's cell from the rehab wing phone twice. It rang through both times. I called Chloe, and she picked up on the 5th ring, her voice already braced. And before I could get 2 sentences out, she said, quietly, like she was reading it off an index card, "Dad said you would try to guilt us. He said the doctors told them there was nothing left of you." Then she started crying and hung up. Nothing left of you. I sat with that one all night, and by morning, I had turned it over enough times to see what was underneath it. Somebody had been carefully managing the story. My father finally called me back on a Thursday, and he opened the way he opens a stuck gate, shoulder first. "Well," he said, "they tell me you're up." No hello, no name. I said I was. And then I did him the courtesy of asking straight. "Dad, where did my savings go?" He didn't even take a breath. "Bills were eating everyone alive, Lena. Your care, the travel back and forth, keeping your things stored. We did what any family would do." Every word was level, reasonable, worn smooth from constant handling. I told him the hospital was covered, that I had seen the ledger, and that his bills and my bills didn't seem to shop at the same stores. Silence. And then his voice dropped into the register he used on nervous livestock. "You want to count pennies against your own family after everything this family has done for you?" I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was that or throw the phone across the room. And then he said it. "You were always the strong one. Strong ones don't keep score." There it was again. My medal. My price tag. Pinned on me while my account bled out. For 15 years, that sentence had worked on me like a key in a lock. And I felt it start to turn. I felt the old machinery of guilt begin to move. And then in the background, clear as anything, I heard my brother's voice, not even lowered. "Ask her when she's out of there. We have to close on the house before August." My father muffled the phone. When his voice came back, it was warm for the first time. "You rest up now," he told me. "The family has things handled." He hung up. August, close on the house. I wrote both down, dated it, and called Ben. Ben came by that evening, his heavy leather folder tucked under his arm. But he wasn't alone. Behind him was Arthur Stone, the quiet trust officer from Ben's firm who had been keeping Falcon Corp. Incorporated alive in a locked filing drawer for 6 years. We cleared the plastic water cups off my rolling tray table, and the 3 of us laid the whole game out like a hand of cards. Here is what my family was holding. My father believed he was still, in the eyes of his children and his neighbors, the proud owner of the Miller farm. But Liam's farm equipment dealership in Kingston was drowning, and the bank had stopped being polite about the debt back in the spring. So, the family had listed the farm quietly through an agent, hoping a $310,000 sale would slide through before anyone noticed the discrepancy. But here is what I was holding. Falcon Corp. Incorporated had owned that farm deed, fully recorded at the county courthouse, for 6 years. My father was nothing more than a tenant with a $1 a year lease. Any sale would disintegrate the exact second a title company ran a standard search. Arthur checked his watch, cool as ice, and said that search would likely happen within 3 weeks. But we couldn't just wait for the bomb to go off on its own. "The first move isn't optional," Ben told me, leaning over the legal pad. "We have to end the guardianship. You're sitting up, you're talking, you're oriented. You will pass any capacity evaluation they throw at you. That's a simple motion, a doctor's signature, and a quick hearing." Then, Ben took off his glasses. That was his version of shouting. The second thing, Lena, is the accounting. The money. Once we ask Judge Sophia Hayes to pull that thread, it does not stop pulling. We are looking at a court-ordered surcharge, interest, and, if you want to push it, a criminal referral for the financial exploitation of a protected person. Your father's name would be on a public docket in a county where his grandfather's name is literally chiseled into the road sign. Or, we handle it quietly. You eat the $49,000 loss, you sign the farm over to your brother, and you keep the peace. I looked at the legal pad. I looked at my rebuilt hand. Give me 24 hours, I told him. There is somewhere I need to go first. Carol drove me out on her day off. I couldn't drive yet, and, honestly, my knees were shaking too badly to handle the pedals anyway. We drove 15 minutes out of town, turning off Route 17 and onto Dawson Lane. The summer heat was starting to rise off the asphalt in waves. We passed the grain elevator, and then, there it was. The white farmhouse. The two massive silver maples. My grandmother's peonies exploding in bright pink and white along the front porch, just like they did every late May. And right there, planted smack in the middle of my mother's pristine front yard like a flag of surrender, was a bright red realtor sign. Coming soon. The driveway was empty. My father was staying over at Liam's place in Kingston while they staged the house for a quick sale. My old key still fit the kitchen door, which told me everything I needed to know about how little they were worried about me. Inside, the house was already a ghost of itself. The furniture had been pushed around, drawers were left standing open, and the walls had pale, dusty rectangles where family photos had hung for 40 years. But the kitchen still belonged to her. The yellow curtains she had sewn by hand still hung in the window. The burn mark by the stove, the faint scent of coffee, cinnamon, and dish soap, it all lingered in the air, unchanged after 15 years. I stood there on legs that had only just mastered a hospital corridor, and I let it hurt. I let the grief wash over me like a wave. Then I reached for the one thing I had actually come to find. On the shelf over the flour bin sat my mother's recipe tin. It was a dented silver box, older than I was. Across the lid, written on a piece of masking tape that had gone amber with age, were the words, "For my girls." I carried it over to her kitchen table, sat down, and popped the lid. Inside were index cards covered in her familiar, looping handwriting. There were grease spots on the cards like old fingerprints. But tucked near the back was something I had never seen before. A sealed white envelope with a single word printed on the front. Lena. I didn't open it. Don't ask me why. In that moment, sitting in her empty house, I just couldn't do it. Instead, I slid the envelope into my jacket pocket, clutched the silver tin to my chest, and stared out her window at that glaring red realtor sign. "Okay, Mom," I whispered to the empty room. "Okay." Then I took out my phone, called Ben Carter from her table, and told him to file everything. If you want your life back, legally speaking, after your family has been handed the keys, it takes emotion, a psychologist, and a Tuesday. The evaluation came first. 3 hours in a bland, beige room. Name the season. Count backward by sevens from 100. Who's the current president? What would you do if you smelled smoke in your house? I answered everything, my hands folding and refolding a tissue. Near the end, the psychologist looked up. "Anything you want in the record?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Write down that I passed the same test my father never had to take to spend my money." She wrote something down. I hope it was that. At the hearing, Judge Sophia Hayes peered at me over her glasses. For a long moment, I recognized that look. It was the same one I'd worn 100 times at 100 bedsides. It was the look of a professional checking her own work. She had signed me over to my father in January, based on good faith and what turned out to be paper-thin paperwork. And I suspected she already smelled what was coming. My father didn't appear. He sent a lawyer, a young one from Kingston, who offered no objection to ending the guardianship. None at all. He was remarkably agreeable. Then, almost at the door, he asked, "Does the court really need a final accounting so soon, given the family's grief and the complexity of the circumstances?" Judge Hayes took off her glasses. "Counsel," she said, her voice even. "Your client managed her money. Now he'll show his math. 30 days. The gavel didn't bang. It tapped. But I felt it in my back teeth. Outside on the courthouse steps, I stood in the June sun, a free woman. 34 years old, the sole owner of my own signature again. Free. Broke. And about 30 days from finding out exactly what my father would do when cornered. Sarah came to see me the week after the hearing. She didn't tell Dad she was coming. For Sarah, that was an act of open rebellion. She stood in the doorway of my little transitional apartment by the hospital, holding a grocery bag full of oranges. Her face crumpled before she got a word out. My baby sister cried into my shoulder for 10 minutes before she could talk. And when the story finally came, it came sideways, in pieces, the way the truth always exits a managed household. Dad had told her and Liam back in February that the insurance had run out, that my care was costing the family thousands every month, that the doctors said I was gone, just a body breathing. And the kindest thing was to stop pouring money into a hole and let the state take over. Sarah, a kindergarten teacher with a car loan, had been sending Dad $200 a month out of guilt. To help pay for me. There was no bill. There was never a bill. The money went into the same pocket everything went into. I watched her do the math on her own year of groceries, and I watched her face when it landed. It hurt worse than the ledger had. He showed us a spreadsheet, she whispered, her voice raw. He had a spreadsheet, Lena. Of course he did. Straight lines, like plowing. And then, because Sarah has never held a secret longer than a recess, she wiped her nose and said the thing she'd actually been carrying. They have to sell the farm because Liam's bank called his loan. Dad says it closes before August or the dealership's gone. He keeps saying it like a prayer. She looked at me, scared, honest, like she was 9 years old again. Lena, why is he so afraid of somebody checking the title? I want to be honest with you about the night I almost folded. Leaving it out would make me a liar of the tidy kind. Carol had me over for dinner. Real food. Her husband's chili. And afterward, we sat on her porch. And I said the quiet thing out loud. I could just pay it all again, I said. Let the accounting slide. Sign the farm over. Save Liam's shop. It'd be over by fall. They'd come back. We'd have holidays. Sundays. Everything. Carol didn't say anything for a minute. Then she asked me a question. A question I've since decided everybody should get asked once. You've been that family's insurance policy for 15 years, Lena, she said. Premiums every month. No claims allowed. When do you get to file one? I started to answer and found nothing in the drawer. Because here's what I knew, sitting on that porch. If I paid again, it would work. That's the poison. It always worked. There'd be a Thanksgiving, and my chair would be back at the table, and my father would put his hand on my shoulder, and the price tag would say, paid for another year. I'd been buying my seat in that family since I was 19. And they had repossessed it the first season I couldn't make the payment. The envelope from my mother's tin was in my jacket pocket that night. I took it out, looked at my name in her handwriting, and put it back unopened. Not yet. If you're listening to this, and you have ever been the one who pays, the one who fixes, the one who's always fine, I want you to tell me in the comments what boundary you wish you'd drawn 10 years sooner. I read every single one. Mine was waiting for me at a courthouse, 30 days out. The accounting landed in Judge Hayes' docket on the last day of the 30, filed at 4:51 in the afternoon. That's when people file things they hope nobody reads. Ben read it that night. I read it the next morning, and this time I didn't need 2 passes. Of the nearly $49,000 that had left my accounts, my father's own paperwork could properly justify about $10,500. The rest, $38,400, floated on labels. And the $9,800 from March, my round little plate of a number, finally had a face. Ben's investigator had pulled the public filing on Liam's dealership, the one the bank made him submit in the spring. And there it was, an equipment invoice, paid in full. March 14th, $9,800. Same week, same amount to the dollar. My conservator, my father, had taken my savings while I was in a coma and used a chunk of it to keep my brother's showroom lights on, then written it in the court's ledger as family support related to patient recovery. Ben laid the 2 pages side by side on the table, the ledger and the invoice. He folded his hands. Lena, he said, his voice quiet. This stopped being a family matter the day he filed this with the court. This is surcharge interest. And if you want, I take the whole file across the street to the prosecutor. We talk about financial exploitation of a protected person. Across the street. That's how small the walk is between a family's private weather and a public storm. One street in front of a courthouse where my great-grandfather's name is chiseled on the donor wall. You don't have to decide the criminal piece today, Ben said. He was wrong. I already had. I just didn't know it yet. My father's answer came inside 2 weeks. And I'll give him this. He didn't come at me the way an angry man would. He came at me the way a farmer clears a field, methodically, with the right equipment. His new lawyer filed a fresh petition with the court. Guardianship round 2. The paperwork used words like traumatic brain injury, diminished executive function, and paranoid fixation. It offered as its centerpiece evidence the fact that I was pursuing litigation against my own loving family, which, the petition suggested, no undamaged version of Lena Miller would ever do. Read that again whenever you wonder how cages get built for women. The proof I was broken was that I'd stopped being useful. And the petition was only the paper half of it. The other half moved the way things move in a small county, through the church basement, the co-op, the diner. Folks heard, Lena came back wrong. Dale's carrying it so well. Poor man. And after all he did for her. That poor family. And now she's suing them. Can you imagine? By July, it reached the place he needed it to reach, the hospital. Human Resources called about my return-to-work evaluation and used the word paused. A nurse with a documented brain injury and a pending competency petition. They had liability to think about. They were very sorry. They used the word abundance and the word caution. My license, my ward, my 12 years, held at arm's length by a roomer with a filing fee. He hadn't touched my money this time. He'd reached for the other account, the one where I kept who I was. And that's when I understood my father was not going to lose gently. Here's what I did not do, and I want it on the record. I did not call the diner to plead my case. I did not post a word online. I did not stand in a parking lot explaining my brain to people who'd already voted. You cannot shout a story like that. You can only outpaper it. And papering things is the one family trade I ever got good at. Within 10 days, I sat for a full independent neuropsychological evaluation. 6 hours. A different clinic, no connection to anybody. I asked my old department chief for a letter, and she wrote 2 pages that ended with a sentence I intend to be buried with. I would put Nurse Miller back on my unit tonight. Sarah, the therapist, wrote up my rehab curve. Ben filed all of it against the petition, clean and cold. But I'll tell you the strange thing that evaluation did to me, the thing I didn't see coming. Near the end, the doctor read her intake summary back to me to check it for errors. My whole history in clinical shorthand. And one line stopped me. Patient reports serving as primary financial and logistical support for extended family since age 19. She read it the way you'd read any symptom. No judgment. Next line. And I sat there, feeling the room tilt. 15 years I had called that sentence love. Spoken in that flat chart voice, it sounded like something you'd treat. I didn't say anything about it that day. I signed the form, thanked her, and carried the thought out to the car like the envelope in my pocket, sealed, addressed to me, waiting until I was ready to hear it. The farm deal died on a Wednesday in July, exactly the way Ben Carter said it would. Quietly. In an office, from paperwork. The buyers were a young couple from Cincinnati with a dream about goats. And their lender did what every lender does before it hands over a dime. It ordered a title search. The searcher pulled the chain on the Miller farm and found what had been sitting in the county records, in plain sight, for 6 years. Recorded deed. Owner, Kestrel Corporation, Inc. Seller of record, some guy named Dale Miller, held a leasehold interest, $1 per year. The buyers walked the same day. I heard how it went down at the house from Sarah, who was there. And I've thought about her description more times than I should probably admit. Liam had the realtor on speaker when the call came in. So, the whole kitchen heard it. And for a second, nobody moved. And then Liam started shouting about lawsuits and scams, about suing the title company. And my father just sat down. That's the detail I keep. Didn't argue. Sat down at the table he'd presided over for 40 years, and let it come. And when Liam finally spun on him, waving his phone, demanding to know what a leasehold was and who in the hell Kestrel Corporation Incorporated was, my 63-year-old father looked at his hands and told his children the first half of the truth. 6 years late. The farm's not ours, he said. It hasn't been ours since before your mother's peonies came back up. I lost it, and a company caught it, and I never found the nerve to tell you the first half. He still didn't know the second half. He was about to. It took my father 4 days to work it out. And honestly, the clues were all there once he went looking. The deed had been notarized at Hollis and Voss, the same little firm on Court Street where his daughter's lawyer hung his hat. The timing, 6 years back, the exact season the bank had suddenly, mercifully, gone quiet. And the lease, $1 a year, which no investor on this earth writes. And which he had spent 6 years carefully not thinking about, because a man drowning doesn't interrogate the rope. He showed up at my apartment on a Sunday evening, in a hard summer rain. No call, no hat. And when I opened the door, my father stood on the mat, water running off him, and looked at me like he'd never seen me before. And in fairness, he hadn't. It was you, he said. just that for a moment. Kestrel, it was you. I stepped back and let him drip on my rented carpet, and it all came out of him, low and shaking. 6 years. You let me pay my own daughter $1 a year and play landowner on my own porch. You watched me carve turkeys in a house you owned, and you never said one word. Each sentence felt like weather, and I watched him arrive in real time at the fork every proud man hits when shame catches him, where the road splits toward sorry and toward angry. And I watched my father check the sorry road, sincerely, for about 2 full seconds. Then he took the other one. He pulled himself straight, wiped the rain off his face, and said, "Well, if it's Miller's money that saved it, then it's Miller's land. You'll sign it over to Liam." I want to tell you the part of that night I've never told anyone, which is that he almost had me. And the reason he almost had me wasn't the anger. It was what leaked out around it. Because when I said no, calm as I could make it, my father didn't yell. He sat down on my second-hand couch like his strings had been cut. This big, weathered man in wet clothes. And for the first time in my whole life, I watched him be small. He talked about his father, and his father's father, who cleared that land with a borrowed team and put the Miller name on a county road. He said that when a man loses his land, he stops being from anywhere. He said it so quietly I had to lean in, that for 6 years, he'd wake every morning in a house he didn't own and felt like a trespasser in his own life, and that shame like that doesn't share a bed with honesty. And I believed every word. And my hands wanted so badly to fix it. That's my disease. You put a suffering thing in front of me, and my checkbook starts moving before my brain gets a vote. He must have felt it, the old machinery turning. Because that's when he reached for the lever that had always worked. He looked up at me with his jaw set, his eyes wet, and said, "You are always the strong one, Lena. So be strong for this family one more time. One more time." And standing in my little kitchen, I finally heard the whole sentence, all 15 years of it. And what it had always meant was, pay and don't make us look at what it costs you. "Dad," I said, "who wrote the note?" He went still, the way a field goes still before hail. "What note?" he said. But it wasn't a question, and we both knew it. I recited it, word for word, capital letters and all, the way it had been recited to me every night that summer by the backs of my own eyelids. "We stopped paying. Survive." "Who wrote it, Dad?" And my father, who had just cried on my couch about his name and his land and his shame, looked at the floor and gave me the plainest sentence of his life. "Liam wrote it." But we were all standing there, all of them, standing in my hospital room, around my bed, around my breathing body, watching a piece of tape go onto a water pitcher. My father didn't write the note. He just approved the harvest. He left a little after that, back into the rain. And at the door, he paused. And I thought, here it comes, the apology. And instead, he said, "Think about Liam. The bank takes the shop in September." The door closed. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then I got my mother's envelope out of my jacket, sat down at the table and opened it. 6 weeks after I found it. 15 years after she sealed it. No letter? Not really. A recipe card. Her buttermilk pie. The one nobody ever got right after she died. And the card was unfinished. The last step's missing, like the timer had gone off on her whole life mid-sentence. But across the bottom, in the margin, in handwriting that had clearly been fading even as it wrote, was one line, "Lena, honey, feed yourself first. You can't pour from an empty pot." 15 years early, from a woman who had watched her daughter start paying. My mother had left me my instructions. Monday morning, 9:02. Ben filed everything with the probate court. The surcharge action, $38,400 plus interest, itemized down to the invoice. Our opposition to guardianship round 2, with the 6-hour evaluation and my chief's letter stapled to its chest. And a formal request that the court consider referring the conservatorship file for criminal review, financial exploitation of a protected person. That last one was the door that locks behind you. Hayes's docket is public record, and in my county, the docket gets read the way box scores get read. And by lunch, it was everywhere. Miller girl is suing Dale. Not suing Liam, you notice. Suing Dale. Suing the family. That's how it travels. By supper, my Aunt Carol had called twice. And the second voicemail dropped the word that the whole apparatus had been holding behind its back all summer, ungrateful. My pastor, a kind man cornered by his own congregation, asked if I'd pray on forgiveness. And I told him honestly that I prayed on it every night, and that forgiveness and a wire transfer are 2 different line items. And he laughed before he could stop himself. God bless him. I turned my phone face down for 3 days. And here's what I did instead, because I want you to know what the money was ever actually for. I walked into the rehab clinic that had taught me to hold a fork again and signed up for volunteer shifts. And I sat with a stroke patient named Earl and held the gait belt while he stood. First useful thing I'd done in 8 months. That Friday, the court's letter came. Settlement conference. First week of September. All parties ordered to attend. And underneath it, a text from Liam, we should talk first. Families got an offer. The settlement conference happened in a hearing room on the 2nd floor of the county courthouse. First week of September, 9 months and 3 lifetimes after my car left Route 17. Long oak table, ceiling fan turning slow. Judge Hayes presiding from the end, with her glasses down her nose. Their side, Dale, Liam, Sarah, and the young lawyer from Kingston. Our side, me and Ben, and my mother's recipe tin, which I'd carried in my bag every day that summer, the way other people carry saints' medals. Liam opened. They'd clearly rehearsed him, combed him, put him in his funeral suit. And to his credit, he got through it without shouting. The family proposes, he said, a full reconciliation. You will withdraw the surcharge action, withdraw the criminal referral request, and deed the farm to me so the family can get back on its feet. He paused here, looked at his notes. In exchange, they'll drop the guardianship petition. And you'd be back at the table. Holidays, Sundays, everything like it was. Your family again, Lena. Your family again. There it was, gift-wrapped. The exact thing I had been buying on installments since I was 19 years old, offered whole. And I'd be lying if I told you it had no pull. It pulled like Route 17 ice. Judge Hayes looked at me over her glasses. Ben's pen went quiet. Somewhere under my ribs, a monitor I'd been hearing my whole life, so constant I'd stopped noticing the sound of it, beeped its steady rhythm. Asterisk pay. 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 Asterisk, I put my hand on the tin in my bag. I have a counteroffer, I said. But first, I'd like to read something into the record. I took the note out of my bag, the original blue ballpoint, the tear on the Y in a plastic sleeve, now like the evidence it always was. And in a quiet room, in front of a judge, both lawyers, my brother, my sister, and my father, I read my family's last message to me out loud for the first time. We stopped paying. Survive. 5 words. I let them sit in the air over that oak table, and nobody looked at anybody. Sarah was crying already. Liam studied the wall. My father watched me, his jaw set, braced for the blow, expecting, I think, to be shouted at, to be shamed the way he'd shamed me all summer, expecting his own weapon turned around. That's what he never understood about me. Right to the end. I don't work with his tools. Here's my counteroffer, I said. And I said it to my dad, not the lawyer. The criminal referral. I'm withdrawing it. Today. Unconditionally. Not as a trade. The young lawyer actually dropped his pen. Even Ben shifted beside me because we had fought about this for 2 weeks, and I had won by 1 vote. Mine. I've spent 15 years watching what fear does to this family, I said. I'm not going to hold a prosecutor over your heads to make you behave. I'm not, Dad. My father flinched like I'd finally hit him. The money is different, I continued. The $38,400 comes back, every dollar. Court ordered on a schedule Judge Hayes approves, with the invoice from March attached to the order. Not a family promise, a judgment. Family promises around here come with tape. And then I looked at the man who taught me what strength was supposed to be. And I gave him back his own arithmetic, gentle and final. You stopped paying 5 months ago, Dad. Today, so do I. The room took a second to understand that sentence, and Liam got there first. So, you're keeping the farm, he said flat, already tasting it. You're going to be our landlord forever. That's the game. No, I said. And this was the part not even Ben knew was coming, because I'd only finished deciding it at 2 that morning at my kitchen table, with my mother's unfinished pie recipe propped against the sugar bowl. I'm selling the farm on the open market to whoever loves it. Kestrel signs the listing this week. You'd have thought I pulled the roof off. Liam came up out of his chair. The young lawyer reached for his sleeve, and over all of it came my father's voice, cracked open at last, the calm gone. 63 years of composure failing him in 1 sentence. That's your mother's kitchen. And there it was. The ceiling fan turned. Sarah held her breath. My father stood at the end of that table with his big hands flat on the oak, shaking. And I understood that we had finally arrived at the one true thing. The thing under the ledger and the note and all 15 years. That ownership was the only language of love he'd ever been taught. And he just heard me refuse to speak it. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my bag and set my mother's recipe tin on the table between us. Dented silver masking tape gone amber for my girls. No, Dad, I said. Her kitchen is coming with me. I bought that house 6 years ago to hold my family together. And I want you to hear what it cost to learn this. A house can't do that job. It never could. It held walls around people who had already left. And the day I signed the listing agreement, my hand didn't shake. But I grieved that farm like a person, and I signed it anyway. Judge Hayes put the settlement on the record before lunch. Restitution, $38,400 plus statutory interest, secured against Dale Miller's equipment and payable on a schedule. First payment October 1st. Guardianship petition withdrawn with prejudice, which is legal for don't try this again. The criminal referral declined at petitioner's request. And Hayes looked at me for a long second when she read that part. And I still think about what was in her face, because it wasn't approval exactly. It was recognition. And the lease, the $1 lease, terminated on sale, 60 days to vacate. My father would leave my mother's house before Thanksgiving. Liam went out the door first, phone already at his ear, and the sound of him faded down the marble hall the way weather moves off. My father stood slowly. And at the door, he turned around. And in front of the judge and God and the ceiling fan, he asked me the only question he had left. The real one, the one the whole thing had been about since the day my mother died. Who's going to hold this family up now? And friends, 15 years of answers went through me. And I let every one of them pass and took the one at the bottom. Somebody who isn't lying in a hospital bed next time, Dad. He looked at me a moment longer, nodded once, like a man closing a gate, and left. And then it was just me and Ben and Sarah, my baby sister, standing in the hallway, twisting her purse strap, not choosing a side, just standing there until she got it out. The pie recipe, she said. The one nobody could ever get right. Do you think sometime you could teach me? I told her the truth. I don't have it right yet either. Come Sunday, we'll be wrong together. Before I tell you how it all landed, one thing from one night shift nurse to you, my dad asked who would hold the family up. And here's what 12 years on a hospital floor taught me. The person holding everybody up is usually the one nobody thinks to check a pulse on. If somebody in your life is that person, check on them today. And if that person is you, stay with me, because this last part is yours. 8 months now since the courthouse. The farm sold in October, full asking, to the goat people from Cincinnati, who turned out to be named Maya and Tom, and who cried in my mother's kitchen when the yellow curtains conveyed. I liked them so much it surprised me. The morning we closed, I drove out one last time alone, license restored, my own hands on my own wheel. And I dug up a coffee can's worth of my grandmother's peony roots from along the porch and left the rest blooming for the new family. And if you think I didn't sit in the truck afterward and let it hurt, you haven't heard a word I've said. Selling well is still losing something. I know what I paid. Here's what the money did. And I want you to notice how boring it is, because boring was the whole prize. The sale paid off Kestrel's costs and closed the company down. The restitution comes on the 1st of every month, court-ordered, and yes, it comes. I paid off my rehab balance, restarted my retirement account, and moved into a small apartment on the east side of town with a kitchen window that gets the morning sun. I'm not rich. Nobody in this story gets rich. I'm something better. I'm solvent and wet, and I sleep like a woman whose name is the only name on her lease. I'm back at the county hospital 3 nights a week on my old unit, easing toward full-time. Carol cried harder than Sarah did. As for them, my father lives in Kingston now in Liam's spare room. 2 men and 1 story between them about how Lena took the farm. He tells it at the co-op when he's back this way, I hear. And folks nod because he's Dale Miller, and his grandfather's name is on a road, and the force I grew up under didn't die at a settlement conference. It just lost 1 customer. He hasn't called. The checks come with no note, which, from my father, is its own kind of signature. Liam's dealership went under in the winter anyway. Bank auction. And I'd be lying if I said I felt nothing. But what I felt wasn't victory. It was the old reflex reaching for a checkbook I no longer keep in my purse. And I let the feeling pass through and out, like weather. And Sarah comes on Sundays. She paid off her own car loan in March. First debt she ever cleared without Dad brokering it. And she told me about it the way her kindergartners tell her about losing a tooth. We work on the pie. It took us 11 tries to solve my mother's missing steps. And on the 12th Sunday, the buttermilk pie came out of my east window kitchen hole, and my little sister and I ate it, standing up at the counter, right out of the dish, laughing. 2 girls in a kitchen that nobody could sell out from under us. Here's the one thing I know now that I didn't know at 19. Love you have to keep purchasing isn't love, it's rent. And the strongest thing I ever did wasn't holding my family up. It was setting them down and standing there while the world stayed standing. That's my story. A note taped to a water pitcher. A recipe tin marked for my girls. A signature that cost me a farmhouse and bought back my name. If you've ever been loved for what you carry instead of who you are, tell me your story in the comments.